Good day, everyone. Our topic for today is Chapter 8, Rizal's Annotations on Antonio de Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. We have the learning outcomes. At the end of this chapter, the students should be able to analyze Rizal's ideas on how to rewrite Philippine history and compare and contrast Rizal's and Morga's different views about Filipinos and Philippine culture. First, let's have some definitions related to our discussion. Annotation, a note of explanation or comment added to a text or diagram. Please do keep in mind this through our discussion because dito lang umikot ang topic natin. So may isang book and Rizal had a commentary about it. In today's time, it's like reaction video on YouTube. Next, successes. The work of an honest observer, versatile bureaucrat who knew the workings of the administration from the inside. This is the events, happenings, or occurrences in the Philippine island. It is an honest observant because there is no judgment and bias sa pagsusulat ni Antonio Morga. Las Islas Filipinas, it means Philippine Island in English. So ang Philippines ay nanggaling sa pangalang King Philip II. Next, Antonio de Morga, a lawyer and lieutenant governor of the Philippines in the late 16th century, author of Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas in Mexico in 1609. Morga's work is based on personal experiences or on documentation from eyewitnesses of the events described. It also presents his different views about Filipino customs, manners, and religions in the early years of the Spanish conquest, which is annotated by Jose Rizal 100 years after. It has 20 excerpts taken from Morga and Rizal's works. Jose Rizal's annotation of Antonio de Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas means events in the Philippine Islands. So, mga events na nangyari sa Filipinas before and after the coming of Spaniards. 1888 of August, he started the replication by hand of the entire first edition. So Antonio Regidor, a dependable, wealthy countryman, willing to support Jose Rizal financially for the publication. That is why Jose Rizal is confident in annotating Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas because Antonio Regidor is willing to support him in publication. So this annotation is considered a secondary source which is not given primary importance by scholars in the field of history. Contemporary historians, scholars, and writers give value to primary sources like the one written by Morga, which consists of 8 chapters. So the primary sources are most valuable because it is an original document from the time period it discusses. Mas prefer nila yung original na gawa ni Morga, which consists of 8 chapters, while the secondary sources involves interpretation and summaries made by the later scholars. So the work consists of 8 chapters. First, the discovery of the Eastern Islands and the government. Dr. Francisco de Sande, Don Gonzalo Ronquillo de Peñalosa, Dr. Santiago de Vera, Gomez Perez de Marias, Don Francisco Tello, Don Pedro de Aquila, and an account of the Philippine Islands. So the first 7 chapters are mainly concerned with the political events which occurred in the colony during the terms of the first 11 governor-generals in the Philippines, beginning with Miguel Lopez de Legazpi in 1565 to Pedro de Aquila, who died June 1606. Essentially, Chapter 8 is interesting because it describes the pre-Hispanic Filipinos, which for Jose Rizal has ethnographic value and indispensability, especially in the reconstruction of the historic period. In the late 19th century, Rizal's annotation of Sucesos was banned in the Philippines and the copies were confiscated and destroyed. So, there is no second printing was done. The circulation stopped and copied were hidden. So, if you read Rizal's second travels abroad, di ba bumalik siya sa Europe? Bumalik siya sa Europe, yeah, right? Right? So, he stayed in London and choose English city because of 3 reasons, right? So, and one of his reasons is to research and annotate Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, which here was preserved in the British Museum. So, doon niya pinag-aralan yung book ni Morga. It is the first Philippine history from the point of view of a Filipino. Jose Rizal sent a correspondence to Ferdinand Blumentritt His friend and a Filipino ethnologist stout his intention to write for the reason that this book will give honor to him and his beloved nation. Rizal's choice of Morga. So why did Rizal choose Morga over Spanish chroniclers? Why does he recommend Morga to his countrymen? Rizal's choice of reprinting Morga rather than their contemporary historical accounts of the Philippines was due to the following reasons. First, the original book was rare. Morga was a layman, not a religious chronicler. Rizal felt Morga to be more objective than the religious writers. Those accounts included many miracle stories. Morga, compared to religious chroniclers, was more sympathetic to the Indians. Morga was not only an eyewitness but a major actor in the events he narrates. So Rizal's first consideration for the choice of Morga. The original book was rare. So it is originally published in Mexico in 1609 and was therefore rare. It had never been reprinted in full until the annotated Rizal edition came off the press of Garnier Hermanos in Paris in 1889. In his introduction, Blumentritt notes that the book is so rare that the few libraries that have a copy guarded it with the same care as they would an Inca treasure. So Morga's book was rare. The original Spanish textbook of Morga's Sucesos had never been reprinted in full until the annotated edition of Rizal. So that is why he preferred Morga, because it is rare. It is rare. So, however, after the Rizal edition, there was a magnificent edition by Wenceslao Emilio Retana, 1909. Retana's edition invaluable because it is the coming from the primary source material. Morga himself and other contemporaries drawn from the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, which amplify and enrich the main text. However, it is not accessible to those who cannot read Spanish. Stanley's English edition of Morga was more popular and satisfactory. So Rizal stand on the principle that the annotations to Morga should be made not by a foreigner but by an Indio. So Jose Rizal believed that the annotations, which aim to correct the misconceptions and provide insights into Philippine history and culture, should be made by a Filipino rather than a foreigner, because, as I was saying, it was our point of view as a Filipino in the Philippines. Rizal's second consideration for the choice of Morga. Morga was a layman, not a religious chronicler. Morga was that it was the only civil, as opposed to religious or ecclesiastical, history of the Philippines written during the colonial period. So layman means who is not part of clergy. Chroniclers by Spanish colonial officials or non-religious were rare, making Morga for over 2 centuries so the only secular general history of the Philippines in print. So the main complaint against religious historians was that they dealt more with church history rather than the history of the Philippines and its people. In 1925, the American historian Austin Craig pointed out that as the Philippines had been a colony of Spain, the histories of the Philippines written during the colonial period were nothing but chapters in the larger history of Spain. This idea was acted upon by Theodore A. Agoncillo in the 1960s, who, like Rizal, espoused the writing of Philippine history from the Filipino point of view as opposed to that of the foreigner. Rizal's third consideration for the choice of Morga. Rizal felt Morga to be more objective than the religious writers whose accounts included many miracle stories. So the third consideration for the choice of Morga was Rizal's opinion that this secular account was more objective, more trustworthy than those written by the religious missionaries, which were liberally sprinkled with tales or miracles and apparitions. It says that all the histories written by the religious before and after Morga, up to our days, abound with stories of devils, miracles, apparitions, etc. These form the bulk of the voluminous histories of the Philippines. So religious missionaries, their aim was not to record the history as is, but to document the achievements of their religious orders and, more importantly, to edify or educate their readers. So sabi ni Rizal, mas maganda yung gawa ni Morga kumpara sa mga praile na nagbabanal-banalan, and it says na niligtas nila ang Pilipinas sa kadiliman. Rizal's annotations fall into two categories. It was straightforward historical annotations where Rizal amplifies or corrects the original. Second, it was annotations which, though historically based, reflect his strong anti-clerical bias. Example of biases: Rizal branded religious interpretations or events as pious lies. Their friars' aim was not to record history as is, but to document the achievements of their religious orders and, more importantly, to edify their readers. Chronicles cannot be described as history in the modern sense, but as a narrative with a moral lesson. Often these chronicles were written to encourage religious vocations or material donations for the missions in Asia. Rizal versus Friars. So Rizal commented on the work of Diego de Duarte, a Dominican. So although it was pleasant, charming, animated, and written in a picturesque style, it was marred by gaps, contradictions, and distortions. Unlike Morga, who was more faithful as a chronicler of his time, if he covers up many things for political reasons, he never distorts events. So Rizal found pleasant and charming pero may mga gaps or kulang, contradictions and distortions on the work of Diego de Duarte. Rizal's fourth consideration for the choice of Morga. Morga was more sympathetic, at least in parts, to the Indians in contrast to the friars' accounts. Only after the religious consolidated their position did they begin to spread calumnies and to debase the races of the Philippines with a view to giving themselves more importance, making themselves indispensable, and thus excusing their stupidity and ignorance with the pretended coarseness of the Indio. There is, however, an exception for the Jesuits who always educated and enlightened the Indians without declaring themselves as eternal protectors, tutors, defenders, etc. So, mas maganda yung gawa ni Morga dahil merong awa doon sa mga natives kumpara sa mga praile na ang pagtingin nila sa Filipinos is in negative way. So, that is why ito yung fourth consideration sa pagpili ni Rizal sa libro ni Morga. Rizal's fifth consideration for the choice of Morga. Morga was not only an eyewitness but a major actor in the events he narrates. So the Jesuits, unlike the other religious orders, were spared arrest and abuse by the Filipino forces during the second phase of the Philippine Revolution that began in 1898. Moreover, the Jesuits maintained a good reputation regarding their vows of poverty and chastity simply because the order was suppressed by the Pope in the 19th century. The Spanish king ordered the expulsion of the Jesuits and the confiscation of their property in all Spanish dominions. Therefore, the Jesuits had been absent from the Philippines from 1768 until they were allowed to return in 1859. Upon their return, the other religious orders that had taken over their property refused to yield both physical and ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Thus, Jesuits were sent to establish missions in the southern, predominantly Muslim island of Mindanao. A twist of history made them lose an opportunity to become a wealthy land-owning religious corporation despised by Indios. So Morga was an eyewitness and therefore a primary source on the Philippines and its people at the point of the first contact with Spain. So mas maganda yung gawa ni Morga kesa sa praile kumpara sa mga nagbabanal-banalan. So hindi lang to basta nakarating sa Pilipinas kundi nagkaroon ng immersion and nakita niya mismo yung nangyari kaya reliable yung source niya. So it is an honest observer or observant. I also add the Rizal's purpose of annotating Morga's work. So first, to awaken the consciousness of the Filipinos regarding their glorious ways of the past. Second, to correct what has been distorted about the Philippines due to Spanish conquest. Third, to prove that the Filipinos are civilized, advanced even before the coming of the Spaniards. So in summary, Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas are events in the Philippine Island by Antonio de Morga, a work published in Mexico in the year 1609, reprinted and annotated by Jose Rizal, preceded by the introduction by Professor Ferdinand Blumentritt. So, in the book of Morga, pinapakita doon yung mga nangyari before and after without judgment or bias sa pagsusulat ni Morga. So, that's all. Thank you for listening. That's all for my report in Rizal's Annotations on Antonio de Morga's Sucesos de las Islas, Filipinas.